Welcome to another episode of Fight the Burnout. Today we have somebody who I've been wanting to interview for a little while. He is a connection through my buddy Brad, who's also a mentor of mine. And he's doing some cool stuff, which I'm excited to talk about. Some things that I've kind of thought about in myself. How can I do stuff that is going to push my mind to the limit through my body? And so I'm looking forward to it. We have Akshay today. He is actually preparing to walk across the Antarctic. And I know he's going to tell us all about it and all the little nitty details, so I won't go into that. But as I always like to start these podcasts, they are sponsored by my business, Create From Why, where we help and get people to live from their purpose and their passion and eliminate burnout through that for you law enforcement out there. But I want you to take one thing away from today. Get your notebook, write down a whole bunch of different things, but then at the end of it, just take that one thing and start taking action on it. We're overloaded with information and tools. We have Google University. We can, Google anything and find anything. You got AI now that'll write things for you. We're not lacking information. We're lacking action. So let's take some action, do that today. So without further ado, Akshay, why don't you take it away? Tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got to where you are. I know you're, a Marine, you're a vet. Sorry, my tongue not working. You're a vet. From Marine Corps, you've done stuff in there. I'm interested to hear about that. You've got friends that are law enforcement. You've done some fire stuff. You also do a lot of crazy fitness stuff, which I know is going to be where we connect, because I like to push my body, because that's the only place that I feel my mind can crack, or that I can train it. So, Akshay, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure, man. So the thing that got me here, I was born in India, grew up there, lived in India, Singapore, moved to Austin, Texas at 13. Very soon after moving here to the US, I got very heavily into drugs, alcohol, used to cut myself, burn myself, very, very self-destructive, lost 2 friends to addiction, was heading down that path until I saw the movie Black Hawk Down. You've seen that movie?
Yep, I love that movie.
That movie changed my life, man. It planted the seed that almost overnight got me out of the drugs and into the military.
Wow.
Specifically, that incident with Gary Gordon and Randy Sugar, volunteered to go down to set up a defensive perimeter when the second Black Hawk crashed, knowing that no idea when reinforcements would arrive, no idea knowing that thousands of armed enemy personnel are heading their way, and both of them died. But the guy they died protecting, Michael Duran, is still alive today because of what they did, and they received the Medal of Honor posthumously for what they did. And that just, it touched my soul, the kind of courage and compassion and warrior spirit that a person would have. And I was living a worthless, selfish life, So after watching that movie, I read the book and read every book I could find on military life and combat, and almost overnight stopped doing drugs, decided to go in. And it took me about 1.5 years to get in, because I have a blood disorder that 2 doctors told me would kill me in boot camp. It transports about 25% less oxygen through my body. So I fought my way in. It was post 9/11 world. So here's a young, dumb kid who wants to go Marine Corps infantry. Yeah, we'll find a way to get you in. So I got them.
Yeah, we'll figure out a way. It's not if we can, it's how do we make it happen.
Exactly. If it wasn't out of wartime military, I would not have gotten in, for sure.
Yeah.
So I'm grateful I did. It changed my life, man. Marine Corps taught me the beauty of suffering. It taught me the beauty of living for something greater than yourself. And the Marines, nobody gives a shit about your well-being. You live for the good of the group and the mission. And the mission and the men are more important than you. And it's profoundly beautiful to live in a world like that. Not to mention, of course, you suffer. And the even going to war with myself was awesome. It was awesome tapping into that human spirit that I did not really know I had, that we all have within us. But you can only unleash the power when you step into the arena, right? When you go to war with yourself. So I got big into outdoor sports after that, like you name it: mountain climbing, cave diving, skydiving, rock climbing. Nature became my playground to explore the limitlessness of the human potential. Until 2007, I was deployed to Iraq as an infantry non-commissioned officer. One of my jobs out there, among many, was to walk in front of our vehicle convoys looking for bombs before they could be used to kill me and my fellow Marines. So dangerous job, but learned to thrive in the face of fear and struggle, So embraced it, got a lot of valuable human experience from that deployment. Came back, struggled. I was drinking heavily, diagnosed with PTSD, struggled with depression. I was at a point drinking like a bottle of vodka a day, man. And after 5-day binge drinking sessions, one morning I woke up and was seconds away from picking up a knife and slitting my wrists. That moment was the trigger. It certainly wasn't like that moment everything changed, but that was the moment that started the climb out of the abyss. It was a long, rocky, hard climb. But I began delving into neuroscience, psychology, spirituality, doing the inner work, confronting my own demons, going to war with myself in a different kind of way, in a spiritual way, to find some answers, and found my peace. That's what led to my book, Fear of Honor, the getting into endurance sports, everything from running ultra marathons, like running for 24 hours, running 50 miles around a cul-de-sac, many ultra marathons, skiing across Greenland, dragging a 190-pound sled for 350 miles across the ice cap, losing 2 fingers to Antarctica, now going back to Antarctica. And now what my whole world is, beyond the business and the brand Fear of Honor, is training for a solo 110-day, 1,700-mile crossing of the entire continent of Antarctica. It has never been done before. And once accomplished, it'll be the first ever crossing of Antarctica without kites or dogs. And that's my whole world right now, is training for that.
That's insane. We'll totally get into that one, because I want to hear
Lots
a lot
of
about
lots
that
there.
because I'm one of those people that, you know, my body will break before my mind does when I got, you know, that drive and that training and that fitness, that, you know, I haven't done ultra marathons and that. I'm lining up to my 4th half marathon later this year.
That's awesome, brother.
The goal is to probably, you know, is to do a full one here soon.
Sick.
And that's from a guy who hated running when he was in the police, but yet ran probably at least twice a week for the entire career. So
brother,
I want to jump back into, because I know, like, you know, the PTSD, and it's a massive talk right now within first responders and military, you know, how fast we're losing people, especially once they come out of the military. What is it? One every hour or every minute, or yeah, 22 a day. Probably more than that. You know, we're losing more cops to their own hand than line of duty. You know, and that's just people that we know of, not that have gotten out of law enforcement. Do you, if you're willing to talk about it, of
course,
what was the PTSD lined up to? Was it a cumulative, or was it one traumatic event that kind of tipped you over the edge, or was it, you know, do you know any kind of details around that, or is it just you were just there?
You know, when I came back, like, I was very hyper vigilant with loud noises. I couldn't handle being in crowds. I lost a friend to the war, so I struggled tremendously with survivor's guilt. There's the nature of war. I mean, war is the volume of life is dialed up in war, right? Paradoxically, war is a strangely peaceful experience, like in the sense that it meets a lot of the human needs at the highest level. Like, you're doing something separate from all the politics of the war, shouldn't have gone and all that kind of stuff, irrelevant. On the ground, we were doing something meaningful. We wanted to help the Iraqi people. We were doing good out there. So you're doing something meaningful. You're doing it with a brotherhood. So the camaraderie, belonging, right? You have tribe. The volume of life is dialed up because you're in an intense environment that could kill you. So you're constantly feeling more alive than you would in the mundane. So when you think about all this and you come back, it's inevitable that, like, it's going to be an adjustment, you know. But
you're way up here, and then you come back and you're way down here.
Exactly. And I experience it even today when I come back from expeditions. Like, when I come back from Antarctica, when I come back from the Arctic, there's always a little bit of a low that follows these experiences, you know. So in many ways, like what I do now, it's a different kind of war in a way, but the transition is very similar. But the problem was, you know, when I came back and was diagnosed with PTSD, and I hit that low moment and started researching all this stuff myself, you know, when I spent 7 months in a war zone where loud noises meant death. An IED could kill you, right? So I was hypervigilant with loud noises. That's not a disorder. That's a normal human response to war. I struggle with survivor's guilt. That's not a disorder. That's because I had a love for my brother in arms, you know? That guilt was just an expression of love. And so I realized that post-traumatic stress is not indicative of post-traumatic stress disorder. Those are two different things. Yes, I had post-traumatic stress as one would going through experiences like that, but the label of disorder completely changes the dynamic about how I relate to my post-traumatic stress. And once I started to recognize this, I was creating that space between the stimulus, right? There's these things that are beyond my control, like initially, at least, being hypervigilant of loud noises, struggling with crowds, normal human response to war. So that was initially beyond my control. So I started, instead of demonizing it as a disorder, being with it, accepting it, sitting with it, confronting it, and recognizing that post-traumatic stress can just as easily lead to post-traumatic growth. So, for example, my survivor's guilt, you know, everybody told me not to feel guilty. And rationally, I get it, man. Like, in war, bullets fly where they fly, bombs explode where they explode. Nobody can control that, right? But the guilt was not the problem. Guilt is not a quote unquote bad emotion. There are no bad emotions. So reframing it, like what I did was, for a long time, I had a picture of my friend up on my wall, and it said, "This should have been you. Earn this life." My guilt became my fuel. My guilt became my ally. It drove me to writing the book Fear of Honor, to doing something meaningful with this life that I've been gifted. So the beef that I have with how we collectively approach trauma is we've set a paradigm that trauma equals disorder, but that is not the case. Like a great example of this is Dr. Martin Seligman, one of the leading researchers in the positive psychology movement. He went to West Point and asked the cadets, how many of you have heard of post-traumatic stress disorder? And it was like 95%. And then he asked them, how many of you have heard of the word post-traumatic growth? Less than 5%. So we've created a self-fulfilling prophecy that trauma, adversity equals disorder, instead of these things you go through, the suffering, the hardship, the struggles, they're the things that make you better. That's the reality. That can be just as real as, I mean, even COVID, dude. Every article on COVID was like, COVID is causing mental health breakdowns. COVID is causing post-traumatic stress disorder. COVID is, no article would say we went through some struggle. We are better off because of it. So it becomes this paradigm that anytime we go through struggle, it equals a mental health disorder. And that's fucking bullshit. Like struggle made me better. You know, that's why I seek it. That's why I go into war with myself right now, because that's the avenue for my awakening, for fucking enlightenment.
I couldn't agree more with you, man. There, like I did a post a while back in a New Zealand police like Facebook group, and it was all around the fact that I'm grateful for all the destruction and all the pain that I've caused through going through what I went through as a cop. The mental struggles, the mental challenges, because I would not be where I am right now. I would not have the tools. I would not have the strategies. I would not be able to help the people that I can help now if I had not experienced all of it.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree with you more, man.
It's so you know, again, I like the fact that that doctor, I can't remember the name that you said, went into West Point and actually asked about this post-traumatic growth, because if you go into war thinking about, okay, how is this helping me grow?
Exactly. It will change how you come back from war.
Exactly. Same thing as law enforcement. You know, I'm a huge advocate for prevention. How do we prevent this? You know, cops go to war every single day. Whether on duty or not, they just never come home.
Yeah.
Until they retire.
I feel you.
How do we shift from okay, all this stuff is trauma that's destroying me, to this is all trauma and experiences that are helping me grow?
Yeah, absolutely.
Just to shift that mindset. So that moment that you recognize this, was there a lead up, or was it just like you woke up one day and you were just like, no more? That moment that you
certainly wasn't like, it wasn't like a magical one moment. I mean, even when I hit that rock bottom after, you know, being on the verge of killing myself, I drank a fuckload of times after that. It wasn't like an overnight shift. And then even after deciding to sober up, I broke my sobriety a shitload of times, you know? So it certainly wasn't a smooth climb. It wasn't, it was very, very rocky. And that's not like, that was my way. I know some people who decided to be sober and they stopped and never drank again. Like, awesome. Point is, this is just my story. And like, even relapsing every time I fucked up, I learned something from it, you know, and constantly striving to get better. Because look, life is going to punch us in the face. You know, you're going to be a good way and life will throw some new curveball your way, man. And then like I had a brutal divorce about 4+ years ago, and I broke my sobriety big time when that happened, you know, and I fucked up, and I don't blame her for it. I take responsibility for my behavior. Of course, it was completely on me. But I fucked up. It was a new curveball that I wasn't ready for, and a new challenge, you know. And now, but every time I've fallen, I've gotten some new insights that have made me stronger and better today, you know, and now I could not be in a better place mentally and spiritually.
Have you found that as you fall, because we all fall, you know, constantly. I fall, you know, I talk about burnout. I coach people on how not to burn out, you know, through using their fitness and that. And there's times where I start to get a bit burned out on things and I go, oh, wow, okay, there I am again. Okay, let's come back. Do you find that you sit in that spot for less amount of time now than?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm able to now move through. Now, not only am I able to move through it better, I'm actually like, I find tremendous value in those emotionally hard places that I consciously go there. So for example, just 2 weeks ago, I did a unique protocol that I came up with myself. There's no manual for this. I was consciously inducing trauma as a mechanism for post-traumatic growth. I was literally creating, I was having flashbacks and nightmares at night that I was inducing. Like I was making myself go to these places. Now that sounds really fucked up, but let me qualify this, right? So if you see
I know
trauma
I have an idea of exactly why you did it. So yeah, carry on. Yeah.
yeah, if you see trauma as an access point to post-traumatic growth, why would you not go there? Because like our demons, the darkness like my flavor of trauma, if you want to call it that, we all got our own, right? Different shit we've dealt with in life. Mine is very, very much war related. So entering that space, like to this day, I'll watch scenes from war movies, knowing they'll tear me up. I'll cry. I'll activate that feeling of that guilt I still felt, but I find value in the intensity of that emotion. Because if you want to live life at its highest level, you want to feel the fucking rapture of being alive, the pure bliss of the human experience, you have to know pain to know pleasure. You cannot know the light unless you have first been in the dark. And like a very visceral experience of that, I think you might have heard me like say this in other podcasts, is I spent 10 days in a darkness retreat. And actually before that, I spent 7 days, complete darkness and isolation. So dark, you cannot see your hand in front of you. For 7 days the first time, 10 days the second time. And when I came out of the darkness, I remember looking at the world, looking at the light, and I felt like, I mean, I was moved to tears, right? And I remember thinking to myself, I had this visceral feeling of gratitude for every bit of pain and suffering I've ever experienced in life, because in a very concrete way, I started to know and understand that you cannot truly know the light unless you have first been in the dark. Like I could not have seen the world through those eyes, the way the light looked, the luminosity of it, unless I'd spent the time in the dark, you know? So that's why now I play on the intensity. Like I go into those edges and I fucking love it. Like there's value in it, and you have to temper it. Like you don't want to, if you, like Nietzsche says, if you stare into the abyss stares right back. So you have to be careful with, I mean, I'm not saying I recommend doing this for most people. You have to have worked through a lot of trauma, like dealt with it to be able to then consciously seek it, right? Now, this is a result of an evolution of many, many, many years that I can now go there and be in there and like literally have nightmares and flashbacks to the point that I'm creating it. I was crying myself every day this week, like crying myself to sleep, putting myself in these emotionally horrific states because I wanted to go there. And to even add the fuel to that fire, I actually ended up doing a 6-day fast where in 6 days of no food, I trained 17 hours. Like on the 6th day, after 5.5 days of no food, I went for a 5-hour hike in 102 degrees with 4,500 feet of elevation gain. And I was so fucking bad. I was delirious. I was lightheaded. I was cramping. I threw up everywhere. I was nauseous, and I'm not saying, again, I'm not like advocating that as a way to do it because it got borderline dangerous, but, the point is like, I wanted to combine a physical, visceral experience with the emotional trauma I was inducing. And dude, as much as it was, I'm not saying everybody should do this. Like by the end of it, I was fucking like, I could not have been happier that I did that. And then the next week, like the week after that I was playing on the other edge of going into light things, like watching funny stuff, singing and dancing while I'm tire dragging, So you play on all edges of life and the volume of life is dialed. But that means you have to be willing to confront your demons to know your divinity. You have to go into the dark to know light.
I'm speechless because it is dead true. I use fitness a lot, and it sounds like you do as well.
Mm-hmm.
Very much. You can get to some really dark places if you let yourself when you're training.
Fuck yeah.
And when you first start training, those dark places come really quick. And the more you do it, like me, I did a strength training session for an hour and 20 minutes this morning. And then straight afterwards went for a 10-kilometer run. And even that 10-kilometer run, I got to the end of it because I didn't do it at a super fast pace. It was just like it was meant to be just like a kind of cruisy 10K, just getting back into doing, the higher kilometers of running. And I was like, I got to the end of it and I was like, yeah, I got to go further. I didn't this morning because obviously it's in my training plan. It's like, okay. But I was like, yeah, my mind didn't hit places like it did a year ago doing 10 kilometers.
Yeah.
And so to your point of starting where you're at, there might be things that you need to do. Maybe it's, again, getting it in a safe place with other people and, pushing those things. But I love the fact that you finished up with last week, you were doing stuff that was in the darkness and you were playing with the darkness and you were using all the tools and strategies that you have in the darkness and you counteracted it with the light this week.
Yes.
And I think that's a real important point to point out to listeners and viewers is that you cannot have the one without the other. You can't just sit in the light and sit in the play and sit in that and actually become resilient and not get affected by the darkness. If you tap over into the darkness and go, shit, I'm here, let's go. And you know, I love it. You've reminded me of needing to step out of places and even myself and not just look for the darkness and the fitness. And I've kind of been playing with this a little bit recently to get back into like the drive with business stuff, and that I need to actually sit in that, tap into that. Okay, let's use some of the darkness to fuel us, to drive us, to make us stronger and better and more powerful and successful in a way of, like you said, sit in it with the intention of growing from it.
Yeah. You know, like one way to think about this, I call this creating like deliberate disequilibrium. So in life, there is a series of dualities that encompass the human condition, right? So there's light and dark, masculine, feminine, life and death, ego, humility, contentment, discontentment, pain, pleasure. There's all these seemingly opposite forces. And we often demonize one side of that, right? Pain is bad. The darkness is bad. If you look at stress and recovery, stress is bad. Ego is bad. But that's the problem. None of these polarities are bad. Both sides have value. And if you truly want to attain not just like spiritual peace, but live a greater life, you have to play on both edges of both dualities and find the value in both, because then you will see that both these seemingly opposing forces can coexist as one. So even Fearvana, like my book and my brand, that's the idea that fear and nirvana, two seemingly contradictory forces, are in fact complementary, and that fear is not the antithesis of nirvana. Fear is an access point to nirvana. So at every point in life, I'm always looking for a duality to play with, that whatever side is causing me friction, I'll go play on the other edge of it. So to make that concrete, like I remember once I went for a run and I saw a sign that said 5K fun run. And I had visceral disgust at the idea of a fun run. Like, you don't run for fun. You should just suffer every run. And that wasn't healthy. Like, that was not a good thing, right? Like, you obviously should, like, it's fun to like enjoy runs sometimes. Sometimes you absolutely should suffer and you should not enjoy it. There's value in that too. But the point is, I recognized that I was bringing suffering into like all areas of my life. And I was constantly bringing it in, even when it was not needed. And so what I did was, if you look at the duality of suffering and play, I went hard into the other edge of play. I would do runs where I didn't even take my watch, just fucking have fun with it. I would do light things, watch funny things, be more playful in life, you know? Like, even if I went to a retreat, I would do like dancing and super light things. And like, look, I'm clearly someone who will always lean on the edge of suffering, right? If you look at that particular scale of suffering and play, that's why I do the things I do. But by going onto the other edge of play, I now have new weapons in my arsenal, because every single one of us, we don't know what we don't know. Right? So we're all trapped within our lens of the reality, within how we think about the world. If you want to expand beyond your current lens of reality, which you have to if you want to attain something you've never attained before, right? If you want your life to get better, you got to do something you've never done before. So to expand into a new realm of reality, go play on another edge of a duality. So even when I went to the darkness, I'm a giant control freak, right? Like, my world is in my hands. So if you look at the duality of control and surrender, I was playing with surrender to the dark, and instead of trying to control the experience, surrender and see what the darkness will reveal to you. And it revealed a ton. You know, even playing out in nature is a beautiful experience of surrender. You don't conquer Antarctica. You never conquer a mountain. You just conquer yourself in the process, right? Like, as Edmund Hillary said, it's not the mountain we conquer, but ourselves. So you surrender to what it reveals to you. And when you align with that, when you surrender to it, that's how you actually move through it, you know? But at the same time, in nature, I feel so powerful because I'm even out there playing in that arena. So control and surrender can coexist. Ego and humility can coexist. All these seemingly opposing forces, they can, and not only can, but they must coexist if you really want to find a greater well-being and greater inner peace, even enlightenment.
That's true. So here's a question for you, because I know there's a lot of law enforcement, military out there that are, you know, they're in that dark place, or, you know, maybe they're on the trajectory to there, or they're, you know, they're like, don't agree with it in some way. First thing, what would you say to them? And secondly, I'll just let you answer that, and then we'll go into the second one.
Okay. So if you're in that dark place, you know, the thing is, you cannot come out of it without doing the work. It's not going to be easy. The problem is our collective approach is, I want to get out of this in the easiest, quickest way possible. And I get it, because the shit's hard, right? Like, I'll give you a concrete example again. I was on this interview and somebody called in, they had been through the Boston bombing. And she was very like hyper vigilant again with loud noises. And so we were chatting with her, trying to help her. And at one point I said to her, the next time you feel anxious when a loud noise hits, I just want you to actually pause and acknowledge the emotion. Just I'm feeling a little anxious. Don't do anything. Just sit with it. And she was like, yeah, but that's really hard. And I go, exactly. It is really hard, but you can't get to the other side of it without doing the hard thing. So what anybody who's going through the demons, who's wrestling with it, you have to go to sit with those demons. And that requires stillness. Carl Jung once said, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. And the human experience right now could not be more evident of that. We do fucking everything we can to distract ourselves from ourselves, so be still, confront that, sit with it. And it's literally as simple as sitting with it. You could go into a dark room. I could not recommend that enough for anybody. It'll be far from easy, but when you open, the point is you have to, as Carl Jung also once said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. And I cannot, like, the value of this, right? Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. So you have to go within to bring the unconscious conscious. And that means sitting still. It means doing more meditation, journaling, doing things that are going to be horribly uncomfortable, especially when you're dealing with the darkness. You could get outside support, go to a therapist, go coach, but you have to get a coach. You have to find a way to deal with those demons, to bring them to the surface. And then you can start using them. You can finding value in them. There's some shit, I don't like it when people say just get over it. Like, there's some shit you don't get over. I'll never get over my friend dying in war, but I'm not living in a miserable life either now, right? Like, I'm not drinking myself stupid, but that's not something I'll get over. I'll learn to use it.
You're not dwelling on it. You're not dwelling on it in a way that is
Exactly.
destroying you. You're using it to help you expand and grow and move forward.
Exactly. And then you have to create that space. Like I said, right, when I was navigating PTSD, right, I had post-traumatic stress, but that's not who I was. That's not like that. Just because I have this thought and I have this feeling, which is not within my control, I could choose to be someone else outside of it, because we are not our thoughts. We're not our feelings. We're not our experiences. We are the thinker of our thoughts. We are the feeler of our feelings, and we're the experiencer of our experiences. There's a space between what is and who we choose to be outside of what is. Like right now, if somebody comes into this room with a gun and points that gun at me, I'm going to feel fear. I'm not choosing to feel fear. My brain is responding to that external stimuli, right? So the fear is beyond my control. Most of what happens in our brain is without our control. We all have those crazy thoughts. We're like, where the fuck did that come from? If I'm driving down the road and I'm like, somebody cuts me off, I'm like, fuck that guy, I'm going to kill him. That doesn't mean I'm a murderer, right? Like, that's not who we are. That thought happens, but you don't have to be defined by it. So you have to master that space between reacting to a thought and responding to it. Like, there's a thought, there's a feeling, I'm going to respond to it instead of reacting to it. And that comes with a lot of practice.
You answered the second question that I had around the first steps to kind of do this, is that recognition that, that sit with that, like you said, the anxiety, just sit with it for a second, especially if it's in a place where it's not, it's not somebody coming into the room with a gun. You can't really sit with that anxiety.
Exactly.
But when after that experience, then kind of go back and be like, oh, okay. And, and actually sit with that fear, sit with that anxiety. So obviously a lot of my, listeners and viewers are law enforcement, have to do with law enforcement, aspiring law enforcement, and first responders. But I feel, and I've talked to a lot of military and that. My cousin's military. I've had people on that knows Navy SEALs and that, and a lot of them recognize that law enforcement in a way is probably harder than military because you never get to go home. You never get to step away from where those threats are. You can't change that environment. You live in it, you eat in it, you breathe in it, you take your family in it.
Mm-hmm.
How do you think, with your learnings and, the way that you do things, and I couldn't agree more, do you believe you could use those while you're in the fight? Or while you're preparing to get into the fight, preparing to get into law enforcement, because we're in that all the time as law enforcement. I still live in the area or live down the road from places that I used to, go to burglaries, go to, domestic violences, I had knives pulled on me. How do you, live, use this philosophy while you're in and amongst it?
You always have to hold on to the meaning of why you got into it. That why has to be constantly ever present. So, for example, right now on a board behind me, it says pay your debt today. This is not a fucking choice. And I have a things of list of like how I'm training for Antarctica. So for me, like when I was in Iraq, my vehicle drove over an active IED that didn't explode for some reason. My friends drove over a bomb and it exploded and he died, right? And I've been blessed to a great life. I was born to good parents. Automatically, as a result of that, I've been best, like a better life than most people. Like I've volunteered in post-conflict zones. I've worked with survivors of sex trafficking, with former child soldiers, people in poverty, leper colonies, and all these places. And you see people in hell on earth, and often outside their control, just because they're born there. And so I look at my life and I believe I owe a debt for this life that I've been gifted with, that I've been blessed with. And I hold on to that fucking reality, right? So the point is, if this is your world, you get a choice, right? Like at any point in life, you can control one of two things, or sometimes both: your actions or your attitude, or both. So the foundational is not being a victim. Like nobody here's a fucking victim. Now we can have things that happen to us beyond our control that we are like, victimized by, like horrific things that happen to the human experience, right? Sex trafficking. And obviously it's not their fault. But when you come out of that, you don't have to hold on to stay in a victim. So you got to take ownership over even as a cop, like I'm making a choice to be here. And if you don't want to be here, there's a choice you can make. You can change your actions or you can change your attitude. Like in Iraq, I made the choice to join the Marines. I volunteered to go out there. But while out there, I didn't have the freedom to control my actions, right? Like if I was exhausted and we sent on a mission, I don't give a fuck that you're exhausted, go on the mission, right? So I in the first 6 weeks of my deployment, I was like pissed off, upset all the time. And then I was like, look, I can't control my actions, but I can control my attitude in response to it. So what's the meaning I'm going to create to it, right? Like finding value in it. You have to hold on to that meaning, and that shit has to stay in the forefront of your consciousness all the damn time. And then coming back to the concept of dualities, balancing the stress with recovery. And there's always a way, like doing things to channel that the emotional stress, the physical stress. Even if you take the example of physical stress, right? You work out, but when does the body get stronger? During recovery. It's the workout when you're actually breaking your muscles down. So similarly, just as the body needs recovery, so does the mind and the spirit. So I call this joy islands. Like imagine you're living in a fucking dark sea, right? Everything is horrific, especially as a cop. Like you said, you never really come home. You're constantly surrounded by this shit. So you're in this dark sea. You got to find and create joy islands. So even in Iraq, for example, I actually started running ultramarathons in Iraq, as crazy as that sounds. Our deployment, we were an infantry marine. So we were out the wire every fucking day. Maybe in my 7 months, we got 7 days off, if that. But sometimes I'd wake up early and sacrifice sleep just to go running around this tiny fob in the middle of the Iraqi desert for hours, just because that was my stress recovery, or like in Iraq, often we would find, you have to find things. Like I have a picture of me and my buddy watching a music video on our iPod between deployment, between missions or whatever, finding ways to bring a little bit of levity to the intensity. And it's on you to create that. The foundation is taking ownership. If you victimize yourself, you're not going to fucking change. And this is going to sound like some people who hear this get very offended, because it's very alluring to be a victim. It's very alluring to stay in a victim mindset. Like, oh man, you don't understand me. My shit is unique. Like you don't get it. If you start finding yourself saying things like that, you are victimizing. Instead, got it. I understand I'm in a stressful, shitty situation. This is rough. Nobody's like, it's not that this is not coming from a lack of compassion. If anything, it's more compassion to help you get out of it. Like I get it. Like God knows I get the stressors of it, right? I've never been a cop, so I can't say it entirely, but in my own just experiences, the Marines and other stuff that I do. But point is to say that don't start with that. Like I'm taking ownership. I can control my actions or my attitude. If this job is no longer giving me meaning anymore, then fucking it's on you to find a new one or to find value in it, right? It's on you to create your reality, whether you can change your actions or change your attitude. So taking that ownership, creating joy islands, and then holding on to your why, holding on to your meaning. And when you're creating that meaning, you want to use both the darkness and the light. So for me, like I use the guilt that I have, like that's the darker side of it. This is the debt that I owe for the life I have. But I also have the lighter side of it, like the world I want to create, right? The gratitude for this life that I've been blessed with, who I want to be, the impact I want to make, right? So we're planning on to tap into my why, to tap into that, I'm using both forces. And I think often when people tap into why, it's only using the light, like, oh, this is what I want the world to look like. This is how I want it to feel good. And that's not bad. Like you should do that too and feel grateful and all that good stuff. But you tapping into the darkness is what's missing when people create the why, at least in my experience as a coach, as doing a lot of personal development work, is using darkness in your why as well. Because we've all, especially if you're a cop, especially if you're a military, you've dealt with a lot of dark shit that most people on earth can't fucking fathom. Use it. Hold on to that shit. Like find power in it, because it has a lot of power.
The funniest thing is that from what I've experienced, helping over 600 people with their mission to join law enforcement, most of them want to solve some sort of traumatic thing that they've either experienced or been in, or have seen. It is the darkness that they're fighting for.
Yeah.
But then it ends up ultimately, once they're in, destroying them. because they
Yeah.
realize
And
I
that's why
can't
you got to
solve
balance
things.
it with the light. You also got to hold on to the light as well. And coming to your point about can't solve it, like you're not going to fucking save everybody. I've lost junior Marines to suicide. I've lost some of the people closest to me. And obviously that shit is hard. But that's why you have to fall in love with the process, not the payoff. That's the
Mm,
biggest, another huge mistake I see in our approach to well-being is like this thing will make me happy when I get the house, the $1 million, the relationship, the car. You will always have problems. Like one of my many mantras is progress is not the elimination of problems. Progress is the creation of new problems. Whether you have $0 or $1 billion, you're going to have problems. So fall in love with the process of systematically overcoming problems. Fall in love with the process of transcending a struggle, one struggle at a time. If you wait to get there, wherever the quote unquote there is, the house, the money, the car, this, that, and the other thing, to be happy, you're setting yourself up for a life of misery.
definitely. All right, let's pivot just for a second. I want to know what's your life why, Akshay. I know you'll have whys for the Antarctic trip, which we'll talk about in a second. For
Yeah.
joining the military, what would you say your life why is?
So the words I want on my tombstone is he brought light into darkness.
Mm.
That's my North Star. That's my compass. That's my why.
Did that, from my learnings and from my from what I've done, from learned from a lot of research, and that I believe it comes from early on in our childhood. Would you say that's true for your why?
Like, would I say that's
You
true? As in, like, am I living it?
as in, do you believe that your why stems from like the seeds were planted back, when you're very young for that why?
I don't know. I think it's evolved over, like, to have the clarity of crystallizing it into one liner like that was relatively recent that it got crystallized in that way. But I don't know if it came from child because I didn't experience a dark childhood. I had a great fucking life. I think it's the darkness I sought out to some degree, and the darkness that I then experienced some, without seeking out, like the war stuff, that led to it. In my case, not to say this is universal, but like, because I almost when I was born, my parents weren't very wealthy, but we certainly weren't poor, like middle class. Now they're doing well, but I had a relative, at least in my own personal experience, even if they went through financial struggles, I never experienced it. So I had a relative silver spoon in my mouth, but I threw that shit out and learned to crawl in the dirt because I wanted to go play on the edges of the human experience. So I think the why developed as a result of crawling in that metaphorical
Mm.
dirt. That makes sense.
Makes sense. Makes sense. All right, tell
Yeah.
us a little bit about this Antarctic trip. I'm curious on, like, one, where it came from, how you kind of came up with it, and then two, just tell us about it.
Yeah. So starting about where it came from, I got into polar travel and polar exploration after the war. My first big polar journey was dragging a 190-pound sled for 350 miles across Greenland in minus 40 degrees. It's like a condensed version of what's coming up in Antarctica. That was my first polar journey. And then I stopped doing polar travel for a long time because it was after Greenland that I hit that rock bottom and, all got into building business, Fearvon, all that stuff. But I remember actually, I don't remember writing it, but recently I read my Iraq journals. And in Iraq, I remember, or at least it was in my journal, that one day I will do a never before accomplished expedition in Antarctica. And the crazy part is, man, that like, I don't remember writing it. And I had never been on a big polar journey at that point. Why the fuck would I want to say that? I mean, I'd done outdoor sports, but I'd never done polar travel. And so now, like, the part of the draw is this is the biggest, this is the last remaining great challenge in Antarctic exploration that hasn't been done. A lot of shit has been done, but to do a full crossing without dogs or kites has never been done. So part of the draw is expanding the limits of human endurance to a level it's never gone before, pushing that edge to such a intense level. I mean, I will be 110. So to go into the second question of like, so getting into polar exploration in some ways inevitably led to this because it is the last great feat that hasn't been done. But the draw, even in polar exploration, is that out of all the sports I've pursued, and I've done a lot, like mountain climbing and all that, polar exploration is not as dangerous as mountain climbing, but it's a lot more suffering. Out of all the sports I've pursued, nothing is as much sheer suffering as polar travel, like at least in terms of voluntary suffering, like seeking it out. Nothing. It's way tougher than being in like my experience in the military. It is just sheer brute. Like one polar explorer in the 1900s, he said, polar exploration is at once the cleanest and most isolated way of having a bad time which has been devised. Uh, and it could not be more true. So as weird as that
Yeah,
sounds,
I'd agree, and you're very similar to me, where it's like, okay, how do we find things that make us suffer even more so that we can grow from
exactly.
it?
Exactly, because that's the point, man. You have to battle the dragon to fight to find the treasure. The greater the dragon, the greater the treasure. So the sheer mental, physical, and spiritual suffering and the suffering is not the reason, it's the means, it's not the purpose. The purpose is what it gives you. What it gives you is transcendence. What it gives you is access into the human soul that you can't access without such great suffering and solitude. So what I'll be doing is I'll be spending 110 days completely alone. For many portions of the journey, I will geographically be the most isolated human being on earth, dragging a 400-pound sled for 12 hours a day in temperatures as low as minus 40 degrees. I've lost 2 fingers to frostbite in Antarctica before. And it's one of the most savage, unforgiving environments on earth. And dragging this sled to hopefully pull off a 1,700-mile coast-to-coast crossing of the entire continent.
Okay, how do you even train and prepare for something like that?
So the core training is tire dragging. So I have these, Brad's familiar with it, our mutual friend Brad. He's seen me do this nonsense where I have a big heavy tire and I go around like a local parks here in Arizona, especially during the summer when it's like 110 degrees right now plus. It's fucking brutal. So going tire dragging is the core training because that simulates the sled. But a lot of strength work, a lot of mental prep work, like that's the big reason why I went back into the darkness for 10 days. Obviously doing things like meditation, mobility work, strength work. I'm also training to have to get fatter. So it's really weird because you have to train strength, endurance, and do it while you're fat. And none of those 3 things go together, So, but I need endurance to drag that sled for 12 hours a day. I need strength to drag that heavy ass sled. And I need fat because I'm going to lose a shit ton of weight out there. I'll be eating about 6,200 calories a day, but I'll be burning over 8 to 10,000. So I'm going to lose a ton of weight. So I need weight to bulk up to have weight to lose.
Yeah, no, it is. It's all a lot counterintuitive. It's so little backstory on me, which I don't think many of the viewers would even know, is when I was growing up sailing, around the world with my parents, I got really into racing. And I got really into solo racing. Like I was doing a lot of stuff on my own, I was practicing single-handing our own boat, our catamaran. And then I was wanting to get into doing solo racing. Life circumstances changed at 19, 20 and ended up here in New Zealand, kind of lost that passion a few years later. But I want to do what, I don't know if you're familiar with the Vendée Globe, which is a solo nonstop around the world. So you start in France, you go down, you go around the world and back to France without stopping, all on your own.
Good. Holy shit. Wow.
That's so that's sick, what brother. I wanted to do. So when I heard that you were doing this on your own, I was like, oh, okay, cool. That mental stuff it comes into everything.
The isolation, I love that you do that. The solitude, in addition to the suffering, the isolation allows you to go places that you can't otherwise go.
Yeah.
Like in the silence. No distractions. No distractions. You start to hear, you hear to me, call it what you want, call it the universe, your subconscious. To me, I call it God, but you hear things you don't get to hear in pure silence. And that dialogue with God is profoundly beautiful.
Yeah. That's why I ride a motorcycle.
That's awesome, brother.
Because it's the only place that literally you can't distract yourself. You have to listen to, and you have to let things go. Otherwise it distracts you. Yeah. And you can't survive in the twisties. You can't survive. I love being solo on twisties and doing long days of twisty riding because it's a place that you can't get away from yourself. And those little voices and those little things will pop up right at the time when you don't want it to pop up, and you have to acknowledge it and let it go. You have to listen to it and let it go. So how are you preparing? Obviously this is just kind of getting into the details of it as such, but how do you, obviously out in the middle of nowhere, there's going to be times where rescue is just nothing, goodbye.
So, so on that, sorry, go ahead. Finish your question.
No, go. I was gonna say, how do you counteract that? How do you prepare for that? How do you mentally even prepare for that? Because, that comes into that whole kind of, those demons are what can burn you out, can stop performance, can stop all the thing. It can stop everything. How do you prepare for that? Is it even a thing that's on, that you have already overcome, or? Yeah.
Well, so the fact is that you actually can get rescued for most of the journey. There's only 2 glaciers where the plane can't land. Like when I was in Antarctica last time and I got frostbite, plane came and got me and I got evacuated. That's why I said it's not as dangerous as mountain climbing. But so the rescues for most part is a possibility. Now that also is very dependent. If there's bad weather, nobody's coming to get you, right? If you lose your tent, you're fucked. Like, but that really shouldn't happen. Like, I'm training enough. Like, if I'm gonna lose my tent, it's my own dumb ass fault. So but things like that, you lose your tent. I mean, it's obviously not safe, but it's not as dangerous. Like that's so just to kind of paint the picture of polar travel, because you might not know. Like, for example, in mountaineering, like when I was on Denali on the 16th ridge at 16,000 feet, there's a section. It's it's such a thin ridge line, 1 foot in front of the other, 1,000-foot drop on each side, right? That's dangerous. You could fall and die. Somebody did fall. A person fell 1,000 feet when I was on Denali. And so in polar travel, you don't have things like that. So, but that's part of the challenge, because when you're on a thin ridge line like that, the environment forces your mind to be present. It forces you in flow because you're right there. In polar travel, you're literally just skiing into empty, flat, white nothingness day after day after day. In mountaineering, as you go up and down a mountain, the terrain changes. The views change. It's more dynamic. You take rest days to acclimatize. In polar travel, you're literally doing the same damn thing, dragging that heavy sled in empty, flat, white nothingness. So just think about that, right? Like flat, white, walking in flat, white nothingness with no stimuli for 12 hours a day with a heavy ass sled behind you. The mental monotony of that is fucking brutal. Like I've had moments where an hour out there could feel like a lifetime.
And I don't even think there's anywhere in the desert that you can get that.
It's damn like it's very hard to get a place with literally no stimuli, because even in deserts, like when I've done hiking, for example, when I go hiking or even mountain climbing, the views are dynamic, right? It's engaging, beautiful mountains, things to see as you go up and down. The views even change. Antarctica, like places like this, it's just flat white nothingness, and the sheer monotony of that is it's a mind fuck. But that's again part of the draw. So and it's mentally like challenging, but.
Sounds like you're on top of all the mental, physical, you've got all that kind of stuff sorted, or plans to sort into that.
That's a big reason why I was doing that trauma work, why I play on the edge of light, because what I'm doing when I do all these things is I'm giving myself weapons to access when I inevitably go into the pain cave, the quote unquote pain cave. I'm teaching myself to tap into the darkness, to tap into the light. Because sometimes when you're out there, you just want to be playful, singing, fucking light, having fun. Other times I want to remember the debt that I owe for this life. And like, even when I did a 167-mile run across Liberia. It was just under a marathon a day for a week across the country. We were raising funds to build a school and all this stuff. And I remember like day 4 of the run, my shin started aching painfully on it was 18 miles into the day. And I tried like massaging it, put some cream on it. It wasn't going away. So I started limping, and just the physical pain, but the psychological, fuck, I got 3 more days left of this. And then I just started sprinting. Something took over me and I started sprinting. And the whole time I was saying things to myself like, remember Neil? Neil's my buddy who died in the war. It should have been you that died out there instead of him. Suck it the fuck up. If you quit now, you deserve a coward's death. People are suffering all around you. Earn this life. Earn it. Saying these very dark things to myself. But those 5 miles I ran were the fastest 5 miles I ran the entire trip. Now, I didn't talk to myself like that the whole time, but because I had brought my demons to the surface, I can now use them as allies in my arena, as allies on my battlefield.
I think that's a key thing for viewers, listeners in that to touch on as well. It's so often, like you've talked about already, it's so often that we demonize these things and we say we shouldn't tap into them.
Exactly. Yep.
There are times where you need to tap into them, especially as law enforcement, especially as military, especially 100%. As a first responder. You have to tap into these. Sometimes we naturally do it because of the type of people that we are, the A-type personality. We tap into them and just go. But if you can logically actually grab them from the shelf and pull them out, you actually are in more control of them, and they won't destroy you afterwards when you come out of it, come down off of it.
Exactly.
And so by being able to tap into that, you're actually giving yourself more tools on your tool belt than you ever know. We had an officer get shot here. It was just over 3 years ago now. He was shot and killed here, and his partner, who was more senior to him, also got shot but didn't die. I went to training with him. And so I knew him more than just we went to training together. We had talked, and I texted him and caught up with him afterwards and that. And you talking about this tap me into that. I remember tapping into that straight afterwards and using it for quite a while, actually. And even still, sometimes I tap into it and be like, he suffered, and he sat there and gurgled in his blood, didn't die quickly.
Jesus.
If he can do that, and just remember his fight. This is easy compared to his fight.
when it comes to dealing with death, Harold Kushner wrote this book, Why Bad Things Happen to Good People. And in it, he says, one of my favorite lines when it comes to dealing with the death of people we love: the dead depend on us for their redemption and their immortality. And I could waste my life. We could waste our lives thinking of, like, feeling bad about my friend who died. Or we could honor their death by living this life with the fucking greater meaning, and honor them, immortalize them through our deeds, So
Exactly.
That quote hit my soul, and I think about my buddy often, and very much everything I do and the whatever results I've achieved, he's played a role in it, and he's immortalized through this work.
Yeah. It's I had a female partner of mine get assaulted and she left the job. She's, still alive and everything, but I still think about for years that day demonized me. It destroyed me.
I understand.
Now I use it and I go, because of that day, I'm doing what I'm doing now. Live it.
Beautiful. Yeah.
So Akshay, I know that there's a financial side to this, and I know you're looking for sponsorships and people to donate to GoFundMe page, which we'll put the link down below. What does it cost to do this trip?
Yeah.
What the financial implications, and how far off the target are you?
So the crossing costs $750,000. It's a very, very expensive journey, not just a number I randomly made up. ALE, who's Antarctic Logistics and Expeditions, they manage all logistics for explorers in Antarctica. This is what it costs, because you're flying to some of the most remote regions. These flights, like the flight from Union Glacier Base Camp to my starting point on the other end of Antarctica alone, is like a $200,000 to $250,000 flight, because it's multiple fuel stops, like small plane. And then, like, normally the Antarctic season is 85 days. They have to extend it just for me for 110 days. So there's a crew of like a doctor, a support team, a pilot, all of that kind of stuff collectively. The flight alone to Antarctica, all of this stuff adds up. And so we are looking to raise funds. Like, I'm all into this. Like, I have dropped over $300,000, $400,000 my own money for previous expeditions. We're creating a documentary around it, but I'm fairly stretched thin now. And so we're looking to raise money and get outside support through a crowdfunding campaign to support and make this happen. Not just for me to do it, but for the stories we'll tell. We're filming a documentary around it. I mean, it's like the 4-minute mile kind of thing, right? When one person shatters the limits of human endurance, it changes our collective thoughts on what's possible for ourselves. It evolves the human spirit to new heights, And so there is a story that we'll tell, like all the lives that have come before me that have touched my life. We will, and I get to make this impact already. I mean, I wouldn't be able to sit here, have this conversation with you and say the things that I'm saying without having experienced it and without lived it, right? Like, I wouldn't be able to talk this way had I just read a few books. So I get to open doors into the human soul, but I pay off the debt for my life by bringing the treasures back from the edge to others to help others. And so I need all the help I can get to make it happen. We have a crowdfunding page at greatsoulcrossing.com. That's great, SOUL, soulcrossing.com. And anything, I mean, $9, $30, any little bit adds up. You get a bunch of people donating $9, it adds up. We've already raised through online donations 28,000, and I've got up to 195,000 coming from other large donors that is coming in within the next week. So we're close to 250,000, but we still have $500,000 to go. So we have a large number to go. But if 10,000 people donate $10, or I mean, like, it all adds up. So if we get large, a few people just donating whatever you can, it really helps. And on the crowdfunding page, I also have a bunch of things that I give away. Like, I have a series of trainings with all my mindset stuff that I've taught, like we've touched on, but I have deep dive trainings on dealing with trauma, dealing with how to navigate the pain cave, all kinds of stuff like that, for different donation tiers, just as a expression of my gratitude for whatever people are able to contribute. There's giveaways, kind of things like that on the crowdfunding page.
Oh, that's awesome, Akshay. Yeah. So we'll put that link down below. Make sure if you're listening, go, donate whatever you can. Like Akshay said, $10 here, $10 there is going to make a huge difference. So no, I appreciate that, Akshay.
Thank you for asking. Thank you for sharing.
Oh no, of course. This is something that I know. My dad was into mountaineering. My uncle owns Yates gear, so deals a lot with harnesses and that. And there's all sorts of different. I've done rock climbing. That I know how it's not a cheap gig to do. Especially when you're trying to do 119 days across the Antarctic, and
Roger that.
Akshay, last question I always like to ask is, what would you say your top tip to self-happiness is?
Stop chasing happiness. Don't look for happiness. Look for meaning. Chase a struggle. Find a struggle, what I call your worthy struggle. Worthy struggle could be being a cop. It could be writing a book. It could be playing the guitar. Find a worthy struggle, create a meaning on that path. Because if you look for happiness, the whole notion of pursuing happiness is deeply flawed. Because when you pursue happiness, then suffering becomes a barrier to the journey. When you pursue meaning, when you pursue a struggle, then the suffering you inevitably experience is part of the adventure.
Okay. What's your top tip to finding meaning? Meaning.
To finding meaning, play in the arena. Stop. Like, I don't like the focus in self-help world about overcoming limiting beliefs. Fuck your limiting beliefs. Like, you don't have to believe you can do something. You have to step into the arena and go to war. Like, dude, I didn't believe I could finish a 5-hour hike after I don't. So most of the things I don't know if I can do it, but fuck it, I'm going to go to war and see what happens. Right. So you develop it by stepping into the arena. Like, one of my many mantras is stretch and reflect. So stretch, go to war, push yourself, and then come back and reflect. Like, that's another mistake I used to make. I would just do one hard thing to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next. But now after every one, I reflect. So I come back, okay, well, is this for me? Like I said, I've tried every outdoor sport you can think of. What led me to pursuing polar travel is by stretching, reflecting, playing in the arena, going to war, figuring out my path. And then you figure it out. Like, I didn't know this is who I wanted to be till about 33, 34. Now, if you're one of those kids, like I have a friend who figured out she wanted to be a chess grandmaster when she was like 4 years old. If you know that, great, good for you, awesome, like own it. If you don't, then fucking go to war and you'll figure things out. Stretch, reflect. Is this my path? At one point, I wanted to go career Marines. That path changed, but I have no fucking regrets about joining the Marines. It's one of the greatest things of my life, So stretch, reflect, and then as in that process of reflecting, start asking yourself, is this my thing? Is this my worthy struggle? Is this why I was on here? But you have to pause, coming back to what we talked about earlier, to be still. You have to pause to have that dialogue with yourself, with God, whatever your, universe, whatever you want to call it, whatever your paradigm is. And then you'll start doing it and you'll start figuring out, okay, this is my thing. This is my why. And once you find it, fucking pursue it obsessively. Like, let it consume the entirety of your soul, let it become you. And then in that process, you'll say, this is my thing. And maybe eventually you'll say, okay, like after I do Antarctica, I want to focus on more normal things in my life. Like, I want to focus on building the brand. I want to have like
the challenge will be being what is normal.
Being normal, exactly. Like, I want to focus on having a family and all that kind of thing, So, but this phase of my life, my world is consumed with Antarctica. So you could also think about structuring your life in phases, But get clarity on what is your philosophy, like what's your why, what is that North Star? What words do you, and a good way to think about it is, what words do you want written on your tombstone about you? That's a good way to say that when I died, and then once you have that, but again, the only way to discover that is by being in the arena, going to war, and then figuring it out on the process. But once you have that nailed down, then you always say, am I living that, right? Like, am I living that path? Am I moving towards that? When I look back on my life on the day of my death, can I say I lived this way? Yeah, but you got to keep pausing to reflect along the path.
I call it debrief. That law enforcement type thing.
Exactly.
Debrief.
Yeah, same thing,
debrief everything.
Debrief. Exactly. Yeah. I love it, dude.
Debrief
Same
it.
thing.
Debrief it.
Exactly.
The good, the bad, the ugly.
Every mission in Iraq. Exactly.
The good, the bad, the ugly. The what did we do well? What didn't we do well? How do we learn from it?
Love it.
How do we make sure we repeat the good? And how do we make sure that we overcome the things that we don't like that happen?
Yeah. To that point, like, all growth is two things: find the problem, fix the problem, find what's working, do more of it. So while you're in this arena, just constantly be looking. What am I doing? How can I do more of it that's working? Find the problem, fix the problem. Systematically overcoming one problem at a time. And there'll always be problems. That's not a bad thing.
No, it won't be. Awesome, Akshay. Any last words before we wrap up?
Just keep chasing the struggle. Suffer well, Most important skill to master is to smile in the face of suffering. So you have to suffer, though, to make yourself trained to be able to smile in the face of suffering. So seek it.
There you go. Face suffering and just keep moving, man. Just keep moving. It's what it is. It's life. And keep growing from it. So this is Fight the Burnout. I want to thank Akshay for taking the time, being here with us. I look forward to watching your journey with the Antarctic challenges and struggles and growth process, because it definitely is one. And thank you for pushing the boundaries of what we know is possible. It's one of those things at the moment, especially in the world as we know it right now. People aren't pushing those challenges, in growth ways. We're destroying lots, and we need to consistently look at how do we grow and evolve together, not as an individual. So, as I said in the very beginning, take one thing away. So I want you to go to your notes. I want you to go to what you wrote down or what you were thinking and processing in your head. And I want you to just grab onto that one thing, like we talked about today, that why, grab onto it and just keep focused on it, keep moving with it. And that's how you'll start to take action on it. And as you take action on it, then you start to become an expert at it and you start to be really good at it. Akshay wouldn't be doing what he's doing today if he hadn't gotten laser focused on things and taken tremendous action. So without further ado, this is Fight the Burnout. Remember, train hard, test easy. If you need any assistance at all, you can either reach out to Akshay. His details and how to get in touch with him will be in the description of this podcast, wherever you're watching or listening to it. Or you can email us at createfromwhy, that's createfromwhy@gmail.com, or go to createfromwhy.com and have a look at what we offer. Till next time, train hard, test easy, and stay safe.